Hello there, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Samantha and this is my channel where I talk all about books. And today I'm coming to you with my September wrap up. I apologize that this video is a little bit delayed, and also I'm sorry that I clearly filmed this on 2 different days. Basically, about halfway through the month, I realized that I had already read 8 books, and I was like, you know what I should do? I should film half of my wrap up now and then just film the other half later and then combine the 2. So I'm really sorry if that upsets you that I'm wearing 2 different outfits, but honestly it was easier for me to do it that way, except then I thought I would read a bunch and I only read 1 more book in the month. I did read half of another book and I started reading another one. Oh no, I read half of 2 books. Yeah, I basically only ended up finishing 1 more book. So I have 1 book to talk about while I look like this. So it's ever so slightly disjointed, and my sincerest apologies for that. Also, this video is going up about a week later than I anticipated because school is already killing me. I'm literally like, I'm filming this clip on the 7th of October, and honestly, I started classes on Monday and already I am like so tired. Also, like, that's another issue about me not editing this video until now, is because basically I spend the whole day sitting on the computer in online classes, and then to spend like, I don't know, 3 hours editing a video. It's just like, I don't want to look at the computer for that long. So yes, I do want to continue posting consistently. I typically post once a week, but it might go down to once a fortnight, and I hope that you guys can bear with me. Basically, I'm just in the process of balancing online classes, reading, spending time with my roommates, and also filming and editing videos, and also keeping up with other people's videos. There's just like a lot to do, and also because I'm not at home anymore, I have to cook all my own meals and stuff like that. So yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that I'm trying to work out the correct balance of everything. And so yes, if I don't post videos that frequently, my sincerest apologies, but I will try and get a video to you at least once a fortnight, hopefully once a week. But if it's once every 2 weeks, just bear with me, okay? I'm trying. That was a bit of a ramble. Oh, I also forgot to say this. I took part in 2 readathons in September. I took part in the Monsterathon and Becca's Bookopoly. And no, it's called Bookoplathon. It's called the Bookoplathon. Anyway, I'm gonna roll the clip from halfway through the month, and then I will come back to you and tell you about the last book that I read. I'm Samantha from the past. It's currently the 17th of September, and so far, in the month of September, I have read 8 books. Not even like I was already halfway through them. I've literally read 8 entire books, although 2 of them were poetry collections. So let's get into them. The first book that I have to talk about is Vampire Academy by Richelle Mead. I read this for the Bookoplathon. It was my chance roll. My chance card came up with Vampire Academy. And if you don't know what Vampire Academy is about, this is a paranormal book that came out in 2007, and it is essentially very cheesy. It's definitely not the best, but it's a really, really fun time, and it follows our 2 main characters, Rose and Lissa. And in this world with vampires, there are 2 different types. There are the Moroi and the Strigoi. The Moroi are like the good vampires. They never kill anyone. They only feed to sustain themselves, and yeah, they don't kill. Actually, if you kill, you become a Strigoi, which are the evil vampires, and they're technically considered dead, and the Moroi are considered still living. And basically the Moroi have powers and the Strigoi don't, and yeah, they're evil. We don't like the Strigoi, they're bad. And then also in this world there are Dhampirs, which are half vampire, half human, and they are always guardians for the Moroi because the Moroi are kind of dying out, so they need to be protected, and the Dhampirs are very good at protecting them. And so Rose is a Dhampir, Lissa is a Moroi, and at the beginning of the book they have run away from the Vampire Academy, where Rose trains to be a guardian and Lissa learns to manage her powers. So they've run away and they get captured and taken back to the school, and that's just kind of where the story kicks off. This was a reread for me. I've actually read books 1 to 4 in the series, but I never finished it, so I'm rereading it from the very beginning, and it just so happened to come up on the Bookopoly board. And this book was really, really fun, and it was like nice and nostalgic. The only downside was that because I'd already read it, I could tell where the story was going from the very beginning. Like, there's a villain. It's supposed to be a surprise who the villain is, but I knew very early on because as soon as I saw that person's name, I was like, oh yeah, that is the bad guy. It was very 2007. Like, you could definitely tell there were some things that were written that like they would not fly nowadays. It definitely has a couple of problematic aspects to it. There's a lot of slut shaming in it, which is just like, not cool. But obviously back in 2007, that was more how things were. Anyway, but it's just a really fun, quick read. Like, I flew through this book. I ended up giving it a 3.5 because it definitely wasn't as good as it was when I first read it, because I think I'm more mature now and I can recognize things, whereas when I first read this when I was 15, I loved it. I thought it was so much fun, and I didn't really pick up on how bad those were. There's also self-harm in this book. I always put the content warnings in the description, but I feel like this one is worth saying in the video because self-harm is a big part of this book, and I actually completely forgot about that until I was reading it, and it's on page, it's quite graphic, and yeah, so big trigger warning for self-harm. The next book that I read was also for the Bookoplathon, and it was for the role of reading a book with LGBT plus rep, and so I read You Should See Me in a Crown with Leah Johnson by Leah Johnson. I do own these books, by the way. I just left them at home. I didn't bring them with me to uni, which is where I am. If you don't know what this book is about, this book has been everywhere this summer. But if you don't know, this book follows our main character, Liz. Liz really wants to go to this school, and unfortunately at the beginning of the book, she loses her scholarship to go to this school, and she can't afford to go without that scholarship. However, in her town, prom is everything, and so if you become part of the prom court, so prom king or queen, you get a $10,000 scholarship. And so she enters the race to become prom queen, and she ends up falling for a girl who's also competing to be prom queen, and that's what I knew about it before I read it. But it's a lot deeper than that. It covers a lot of heavy topics like death of a parent and also chronic illness, and it also touched upon racism and homophobia. So it definitely wasn't like a super light book all the time. It definitely dealt with heavier themes, but I really liked this. It was so much fun for the most part. It was just really fun. I actually listened to the audiobook on Scribd, and I really liked the narrator as well, and it was super quick. That is the slight thing, is the fact that I did listen to it on audio. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I could have, because I was like doing stuff around the house whilst listening, and so that's completely on me. I think sometimes I wasn't paying full attention, although I did for the most part, obviously. This was really cute. It was really fun. And also dealt with heavier themes, which I do enjoy in my contemporaries, a nice balance of both. The best of both worlds. I hate myself. If you're looking for a fun teen book, I would definitely recommend this. The other issue I had with it was that it did have the trope of miscommunication, which is one of my least favorite tropes ever, and so that kind of irritated me. And then also I found that Liz got together with her girlfriend really quickly. Like, they went on one date and then they were like, oh, so we're girlfriends now, and I was like, it's a bit soon. I don't know, but it was really good, and I will definitely read other books by Leah Johnson. The next book that I read was a reread of one of my favorite poetry collections, if not my favorite poetry collection, and that was, of course, The Sweetest Kind of Poison by Wismer. This is just an absolutely stunning poetry collection about an abusive relationship and kind of putting yourself together after going through that, and kind of like the last two parts are really about self-love and self-worth and really learning how to put yourself back together after being in such a toxic situation. And if you don't know, Katie is a booktuber. She is from the channel Kate's Book Date. I love her channel. I feel like I repeat myself a lot because I've already talked about this book so many times on my channel, because this was my 4th time reading it. This wasn't for either of the readathons that I'm taking part in. This was just for my own personal enjoyment, and also just because I love to read a poetry collection kind of once a month. I've talked about this before, but I find that to be a really cathartic experience. And actually, after reading this, I started to write some of my own poetry. Only a few poems, but I think after writing them, I felt so much better, because I just needed to get some feelings out, and writing them down in that format was just really cathartic. And I also find that reading it, I get that same sort of experience, even if it's not talking about my own personal experiences, but it's still like stuff that I can relate to. And I just find it's just so beautiful, so beautifully written. And yeah, I absolutely love this. 5 out of 5 stars every single time. Read this if you like poetry, if you can deal with reading a book that features abusive relationships. The next book that I read is also a poetry collection, also by Katie. That is her brand new poetry collection, Poems for the End of the World. I'm gonna read you what it says on Goodreads. It says, Poems for the End of the World is a coming-of-age collection, an exploration of the confusing and disillusioning trek through young adulthood in a broken world. Divided into 4 chapters, waking up, growing pains, crushing realities, and disappointing beginnings, this collection covers everything from self-discovery and heartbreak to chronic illness and fresh starts. And this one was also extremely beautiful. I actually got an ARC of this, so thank you so much to Katie for giving me an ARC and giving me the opportunity to read this book before anyone else, because I love her poetry, as I've said. I absolutely loved this, and again, I highlighted so many things. There were so many things that I related to even though I hadn't experienced the exact same thing, obviously because every single person's experience is different. But I mean, I've never been in an abusive relationship, and that was covered again in this collection, although not as much as in Poison. This was about so many different topics, but it did cover that briefly. But there were a lot of other topics in here that I can relate to some of them not so much, but I still find the words just to be so beautiful and heartbreaking, and I just loved this so much. I will say Poems is a lot heavier than Poison. I feel like in Poison the last like 2 parts are really about, you know, putting yourself back together and that growth and that acceptance of yourself and that love of yourself. Whereas this collection I feel like was a lot heavier and focused a lot more on the heavy themes, and it was less so about that kind of growth. It was more about like living through it. Kind of. I don't know if I'm making sense out of this, but it's really hard to like review a poetry collection well, because like I don't want to like spoil it, but also it's like, I don't know, it's a difficult one to review, you know? I loved it equally, although I will say that this one was heavier than Poison, and I will definitely be buying a physical copy. It comes out on the 1st of October. I'm not sure when I'm posting this video, but if it's already out, please pick it up because it was really good. The next book that I read was Let's Talk About Love by Kann. This completed a challenge for Monsterathon, which was to read a book with LGBT plus rep, and this also completed a challenge for me for Bookoplathon, which was to read a standalone, because this is a standalone and this has an asexual main character. This book basically follows our main character Alice, and Alice is biromantic asexual, and at the beginning of the book her girlfriend Margot breaks up with her because she's upset that Alice isn't interested in sex, and then it just kind of follows Alice over the summer as she is working in a library and she meets this boy called Takumi. She kind of starts to have feelings for him, but she's really wary of getting into another relationship after the terrible end to her relationship with Margot, because she's worried about opening up to him and what his reaction would be to her asexuality. I unfortunately did not like this book very much. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love the idea and I really want to read more books with asexual main characters. However, for me personally, the writing style, I don't know what it was, but I just did not vibe with the writing style at all. I found it really difficult to get into, and I don't know what it was, but I just like could not deal with the writing style. There was a lot of telling and not showing. Like Alice and Takumi would go and do something, like they went paragliding and they had all these like cute moments. Instead of showing us those moments, it would just skip to Alice telling someone about these things that happened. She'd be like, oh, I just went paragliding with Takumi. And it's like, why didn't you show us that moment? Because surely, you know, it kind of seemed like an important moment, and there were other more important moments than the paragliding. It was stuff like that where instead of showing us the actual moment, we just got told about it later. And so I don't know, it was just not great. I also thought that Alice was a really annoying character, and like I'd heard that about this book. I'd heard that she was annoying, but I was like, she won't be that annoying, but she was. I definitely didn't hate the book or anything. It just really was not my thing, and I didn't particularly like it. It had its sweet moments, and it was really interesting to read a book about an asexual main character, as I don't think I've read a book with a main character who's asexual before, so that was really interesting. However, unfortunately, it wasn't for me. The next book that I read was another arc, which comes out on the 1st of October, and that was When Life Gives You Mangoes by Kereen Getten. And this is set in Jamaica, and this follows 12-year-old Clara, who cannot remember the events of last summer. And with the arrival of a new girl called Rudy, she and her best friend Gaina start to kind of drift apart, and Rudy and Clara go on all of these adventures, and that's kind of pretty much the plot. Like the main plot is just Clara and Rudy going on adventures and sort of exploring the reasoning why Gaina and Clara are not as close anymore, and discovering why Clara doesn't remember the events of last summer. This book was very sweet and touching, and I feel like Getten did a really good job of portraying the sense of community and friendship. Unfortunately, there is a twist in this book, which I did see coming, unfortunately, but it didn't really take away from my enjoyment. The reason why I didn't rate this higher is because it was just a little bit too short, and I would have liked to see a little bit more development of the relationships, and sometimes things moved a little bit too quickly for my liking. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I thought it was really sweet and touching, a really nice middle grade story, which I think a lot of people will enjoy, and I gave it a 3.25 out of 5 stars. The next one I read is definitely my favorite book that I've read so far this month, and that was Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This book was so compelling. I'm sure you know what this book is about because it has been everywhere, but this book follows our main character Amira, who is a babysitter, and she's asked by the family to take the daughter away whilst the police have to come to the house. So it's about 11 o'clock at night, and Amira takes the girl to the supermarket, and at the supermarket a customer reports her to the security guard because Amira is black and the child is white, and so she's accused of kidnapping this child. And when her employer Alex hears about this, she really wants to help, but Amira is very wary of this, and then someone from Alex's past comes into Amira's life, and then the story sets off in a way that you just know is just not going to end well. And the book is about performative activism, as I'm sure you're aware, because everyone's been talking about this book and I'm not doing a good job of summarizing it. But I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I am very much a character-driven reader, and I feel like the characters in this book were so well done that it was so interesting. It was just such an interesting read, and it was so captivating. Like, I started reading it and I did not want to stop at all. It was just such an interesting read, and seeing how everything is going to turn out, and like you can see it coming. Seeing the build up to the climax, it was just phenomenal. It was so well written. I really loved the characterization. I think she just did such a good job. I cannot believe that this is a debut. This book was just, I have no other words apart from captivating. Like, I could not stop. It was phenomenal. I don't even know what to say. I don't know what else to say. Read this book. And the final book that I have to talk about right now is The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. I actually just finished this today. This was the oldest book on my TBR. I've owned this since 2014, and I remember hearing so many people raving about this back then, and also the cover is just gorgeous. Young 15-year-old me picked this up and did not know what she was getting herself into, and then I didn't pick it up for 6 years, and I finally read it. I actually buddy read this with Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe. I'll link her channel down below. Please go check out her videos. If you're not watching her videos, you are missing out. And this book basically follows our main character, Matt, and at the very beginning of this novel we find out that Matt's brother Simon has died. There isn't very much plot to this book because this is a mental health book, so it doesn't really have very much of a plot. It's really just the story of how Matt's mental health worsens after the death of his brother. That's basically it. It doesn't really have very much of a plot to it. Unfortunately, this was not my cup of tea. This story was told in a really interesting way, but unfortunately it just didn't work for me because we kept on jumping around in the timeline, and so it wasn't confusing, but it meant that I wasn't really engaging with it very much, because we'd have like a couple of pages from Matt's childhood and then we would skip all the way like 15 years later, and then we'd skip back and forth. We jumped around a lot. I understand why Filer chose to write it this way, but for me, it meant that I didn't like engage with it very much. I also just didn't feel very connected to the characters. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the last couple of chapters where I really actually did feel something, which that sounds so harsh, and I don't mean it to sound harsh, but I just wasn't connecting to the characters, so it was really hard for me to kind of feel the emotions that I should have been feeling. I very much appreciate what this book tried to do, but unfortunately it just wasn't for me. That's all I really have to say. It's sad because I've owned this for such a long time, and it would have been great to like have owned this for so long and then this become a new favorite, but unfortunately that was not the case. But it's off my TBR now. Oh, did I even say what I rated this? I didn't say what I rated this. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. And again, like with Let's Talk About Love, 2 stars isn't a bad rating necessarily. It just means it wasn't for me. Anyway, those are the first 8 books that I read this month. I'll be back at the end of the month to tell you however many other books I read. And I've been talking for so long. Why can I not wrap up books quickly? I don't know. Hi, it's me again. So the 9th and final book that I finished in the month of September, I was about to say October, was Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman. This book follows our main character, Caden, and it's told in 2 different plot lines. So the first plot line is Caden on a ship to Challenger Deep, which is basically the deepest point of the Marianas Trench and the deepest part of the world. The other plotline is Caden at high school and his experience on a psychiatric ward dealing with schizophrenia. That is the very bare bones of the plot. I don't really want to go too into it because, I mean, that's basically all you need to know going into it. If you've been here before, you know that I'm a huge fan of Neal Shusterman. Well, I'm a huge fan of Neal Shusterman's Arc of a Scythe trilogy. It's my favorite trilogy of all time. Probably. It is perfection. Anyway, and so in my mind, Neal Shusterman is one of my favorite authors, and then I realized I had not read anything else by him until I read this, and this was a masterpiece. It was fantastic. The Challenger Deep storyline, like when they're on the mission to Challenger Deep, it is a little bit confusing at first because it's just like you kind of don't really understand why it's relevant, but later on in the book, probably around the halfway point, is where I actually started to get into it, and I kind of realized how it tied into the other plot line. And I just think that this book was absolutely beautiful, and it's quite funny because I read this right after I read The Shock of the Fall, which also deals with schizophrenia. But I think Challenger Deep was a much better book in my personal opinion, also because this book was written based partially on Neal Shusterman's son's own experiences, and the drawings throughout were done by Neal's son. He worked very closely with his son to write this book, so I feel like it's probably a very accurate and thoughtful portrayal of schizophrenia. Oh, sorry. sorry for the bad quality. I'm filming on my laptop. I did not make myself very clear here. I'm not trying to say that The Shock of the Fall wasn't a thoughtful and accurate portrayal, because I'm not sure. However, what I should have said is that I just didn't feel the same connection with The Shock of the Fall that I did with Challenger Deep. I felt a lot more emotionally connected to Caden and his journey. I'm not really sure why that is. Overall, I just enjoyed Challenger Deep a lot more than The Shock of the Fall, and the only reason I'm comparing them is because they do cover very similar subject matter, and obviously I did read them back to back, which was coincidental. Anyway, back to the video. Also, I feel like The Shock of the Fall was very scattered and difficult to follow in some ways, and whilst Challenger Deep is the same, it does start to make sense later on. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm very tired. I did not get a lot of sleep last night, and I also read this book like 3 weeks ago, so yeah. No, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, probably. Anyway, but yeah, this book was brilliant. I did end up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars just because like it wasn't like a new favorite, but it was fantastic, and I feel like it deserves a 4.5. That is everything that I read in September. This is a very rambly video because it's a little bit disjointed and I'm very tired right now, but I will try and make my October wrap up less jumbled, and I'll try and get it up in a more timely fashion. So again, my sincerest apologies. We're adjusting to the new semester, the penultimate semester of my university degree. Oh my god. I know September was a little while ago now, but please let me know what books you read in September. Let me know what your favorite book was. I would love to know. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below. I promise I normally have a better energy than I do today. I'm very tired, but yes. And I'm going to try and upload videos every Friday, so hopefully I'll see you next Friday with another video. Bye. The Moroi, sorry, I really struggle with R's sometimes, so that's a really hard word for me. Moroi. There's a helicopter. What are you doing? I feel like I'm back in London. We never get helicopters here. Wow. Oh, it's like an army helicopter, I think. Anyway, and oh.